Hi, welcome to the FMCG guys. This is Efren Rosario, joined again by my co-host, Daniel Torres. Hi, Daniel. How are you?
Hello, Efrain. Doing well, doing well. Nice to see you.
Excellent, excellent. Who do we have on the show today, Daniel?
Well, first of all, let me put things in context. So Europe, which is the old continent, as they sometimes call it, is as diverse as it gets, right? We have nations, languages, cultures, ideologies, more than we can possibly ever probably learn or know about. And this diversity also has an impact on the shopping in every market. Well, while in the US, and you know this well, Efrain, with a very sizable population, is dominated by accounts that cover the whole territory. So you're negotiating for the whole territory. Every European market has its own local champions, with a few cross-continental exceptions. We can all think of key retailers that are across the continent. But what this means for e-commerce is that this disparity means that every European market has a distinct level of maturity. So it's really challenging to come up with an all-size-fits-all approach. Our guest today, Alberto Kechler, has the challenge of leading e-commerce and steering e-commerce across the continent for Arla Foods, which is a Danish dairy co-op. In this episode, we'll aim to understand how one can accelerate digital across a complex environment in an already complex category. Hi, Alberto. Thanks for joining us. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Danny. I'm excited to be here with you guys today. So thank you for inviting me.
Exactly. It's taken us a while, but we've made it finally.
It has. It's been a long journey, but it's great to be with you guys today. So looking forward to this.
Thanks again for being with us, Alberto. Like you said, it's the end of the it's getting to the end of the year, so obviously it gets to be quite busy on most people's diaries.
It is, Efren, and as I said, good to meet you as well.
Likewise.
So Alberto, for the audience to get acquainted with you, someone with an Italian first name, German last name, living in the UK with a kind of Italian accent. What are you currently doing at Arla Foods?
Yeah, I think you said it's a bit of a mess, right? I mean, I am Italian. I have been living in the UK for 12 years. I've been working here across different FMCGs. I'll give you a little bit of a background in a second. My family originally is German. The accent is a bit of a mix of Italian immigrants into the UK for a while. So take it as that. And I think that's a good description of what I do. As you said, I work for Arla. It's probably worth giving you a little bit of a flavor as to what Arla is before I do that. And then I'll give you a little bit of understanding in terms of my career. So Arla is one of the biggest dairy companies globally. It's the fourth largest in terms of milk intake. It's a cooperative, which means that it's farmer-owned. We have 10,000 farmers scattered across 6 of our key markets, the Nordics and mainland Europe. We have some big global brands like Lurpak, Castello, Puk, which is a big spreadable that's sold in the Middle East. I started my career, believe it or not, in fashion. I quickly moved away from fashion.
Where did you start in fashion?
It was I left the UK with a big willingness to go back to Italy and drive the biggest industry for Italy. At the time, it was fashion, and I quickly went into high-end fashion. Left it after a year. I pivoted away from it because I quickly understood it had nothing or very little to do with my appetite at the time for inside-led marketing. So I then transitioned into FMCG, into Nestle. At the time, I quickly went through the realms of what was the introduction into Nestle through sales, marketing, and category, progressed into marketing, and then I stumbled upon e-commerce back 15 years ago, where I had the opportunity to set up the direct-to-consumer business on Dolce Gusto, which is, if you want, the cousin to Nespresso, and I kind of fell in love with it. And I've been in e-commerce ever since, across the UK, in Nestle, in Mondelez for 4 years, driving the acceleration unit in the Eurozone, and now since a couple of years in Arla, where I lead the acceleration team at a European level.
The acceleration team for e-commerce, I understand.
Yeah, correct. So basically, if I was to make it very simple in terms of what me and my team do, there are three pillars of what we do. We're acceleration units. So we're not a center of excellence unit per se. Center of excellence is a pillar of what we do, and it's about driving the capability, both from a technology perspective, but mostly I think the focus over the last year has been on people capabilities, driving the insights and analytics behind that. But we're also responsible for driving strategy and acceleration. That means obviously strategy holistically within Europe eCommerce, but at the same time also some international partnerships, both from a customer lens, but also from an agency perspective. And then a fun chunk of what we do is the channel operation perspective. So think about how we drive digital shelf, how we drive new channel development, how we drive commercial operations into it. So we have a team of 5, pretty much one person responsible for driving each of those 3 pillars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, digital shelf, I think together with retail media, like the words of the second half of the year here in Europe. I think they were probably last year's words in the US. This year's in Europe.
I mean, for me, it's been the constant, right? It's one of those things that we take across no matter what we do. It's the basic foundation of what we need to do. And you know, in a situation where we are in what I call a poly crisis, or a lot of crises coming together and impacting consumer behaviors. I think for us, especially in some of our commodity categories we play in, unless we win on the digital shelf, it's very difficult to claim we are anywhere near winning. So it's all about this foundational perspective. And it's been a real focus from my team in terms of that acceleration journey in all of the markets, irrespective of where we go into.
Yeah, but obviously you're driving different markets from a headquarter, at least European headquarter position. With Ephraim, we always compare like Europe and the US as markets. Like the US has practically the same economy size and the same population, but at the same time, you can build a great economy of scale because it's a very homogeneous market. You have regional players, but broadly speaking, it's very homogeneous. The markets you're managing are very heterogeneous. So how do you drive and accelerate e-commerce in these different markets that you're managing centrally? How do you get things done, basically?
It's an interesting question. Let me try to offer you how we kind of approach it from an Arla perspective. So if I take my lens to the European level, there are 6 core markets we play into. I mentioned the Nordics with obviously Sweden, Denmark and Finland being the key markets where our business has grown, and our business has started realistically through a merger of a Swedish and Danish business back in the old days. But we also have a UK, which is the lion's share of our revenue at a European level. And then we have some smaller markets for us where we play a very different role from an Arla brand perspective, which are the Netherlands and Germany. And it means that the approach from our perspective tends to differ because the maturity, even internally, is very different. And the way we look at it in terms of how we prioritize the work that we do with the markets is through 2 different areas. So we have a mix of components that we look into, external components that could be very much around boxing those markets into what I call market archetypes, based on grocery penetration, channel mix, number of retailers, the retailer ecosystem, and also the digital adoption in general of these markets. And then all of those that are internal components. And those internal components are realistically a mix of 2 things. How strong Arla brand is, the categories that we play in, where we overtrade and undertrade, and then from a brand share perspective, where we over and under index, as well as the projection of growth that we might have in those markets within our categories. And then the second part of it is what I call a digital maturity index. And this is really the nuts and bolts of what's really driven our jobs to be done when I approach the markets. And it's basically a recognition that in general, successful digital business have pretty much 13 components, digital competencies, if you want, that are common, right? And those range from anything to do with sales and strategy, meaning strategy and leadership adoption, the drive from the top in terms of the digital business strategy holistically, how the channel mix is managed, the online mix is managed. It has to do with what I call flywheel management. Every big FMCG business has what I would refer as a flywheel. Assortment, availability, search, content, and activation being the pillars of that flywheel from that perspective. And how we play, again, in digital shelf, how we win in digital shelf is a key component of how we assess ourselves from a maturity index perspective. And then the big chunk of capabilities going from supply chain, data, org structure, technology, and obviously the people component that I mentioned earlier. And obviously what we've done is we've benchmarked ourselves against the best-in-class peers in the market. Against these peers, we kind of come up with what I would say a different level of maturity, ranging from the novice, the people or the markets that have just embraced e-commerce or recognize e-commerce as a channel, or the leaders, those that are really offering a frictionless, integrated commercial experience when it comes to digital business. So what we do is we benchmark ourselves against those 13 components against the best-in-class peers, and it gives us a gap. And the way we approach it is we have a very simple framework, fix, build, impact across those 13 components that we work against. So, for example, on content, we start from fixing the basics. On content, if we start from a very low level of maturity in market X, in Germany, for example, then we quickly transition into what's the job to be done next. How do we go from a novice to an intermediate and from an intermediate to then a leader? And we do so, as I said, through a very simple framework of fix, build, impact that we internally develop. And that allows me to have a very clear view or an action plan for the foreseeable in terms of what needs to be done, what the jobs to be done are in each of those markets.
That's it's interesting because, like you said, it's a very pragmatic sort of way in terms of being able to objectively look at this and very matter-of-factly be able to assess a market. And I always say that, you know, the role when you're in these kinds of regional or global roles, oftentimes, you know, you have to manage that conversation very carefully, right? Because you never want to tell somebody that their baby is ugly in a way, right? So being able to do it in a very pragmatic, objective sort of way is makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, like you said, that you guys are to the level where you're looking at 13 competencies, which is quite a lot.
I think, Efren, you're right. You know, it's the reason why it needs to be very objective on that perspective is to avoid sticky conversation. And we've had sticky conversation with people are opinionated, people have a different view, and enough it is based off the fact that we don't necessarily agree on the common grounds of what good looks like, right? But having this approach with a very clear, tangible framework has been a very successful way for us to look at what I need to do in the market, but also allow me to understand where Arla as a total company is at a European level in terms of the capability gaps that we have against the best-in-class peers within FMCG, and at the same time also understand different levels of maturity per market, and then tailor, if you want, the training that needs to be done, the people capability needs to be done, the technology solutions that we need to then roll out, the content development that needs to be done. So where are we at in retailer X in country Y? And it really allows us to massively personalize this acceleration plan by market in terms of the clear, tangible jobs to be done.
Well, and I think you're also in a position, like you said, you've got some economies of scale in regards. So if you're seeing that there's a common gap that needs to be addressed, and obviously you can develop something at a regional level for Europe, but obviously then it gets applied to fill that gap in each of the respective markets at that point.
It's that, and also allows me to raise the floor and raise the ceiling, because I can raise the floor where I benchmark, say, what I would say an immature market for us being Germany to the likes of the UK, which is a bit of a more mature market in terms of the initial first leap forward, and then move forward in terms of where I need to take the UK in terms of raising the ceiling against, say, example, I don't know, a Nestle Purina as a benchmark in terms of some of the stuff that these guys are doing very well that we aim as for us in terms of the North Star ambition.
So, and I think that's a great segue to the next question I wanted to ask, which is getting your view in terms of what is the state of omni-channel retail here in Europe, right? I mean, Daniel referenced, that we talk a lot about some of the similarities and differences to markets like the US, Asia. We've talked to people about the Singles Day recently, but here in Europe, I'm curious to get what is your sense, given your experience across many companies, as to what's the current state of omnichannel right now?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think, first of all, I think there's no denying that the acceleration in digital adoption that the pandemic has brought is very tangible, right? It's there. And I think what I'm observing now is a lot of internal discussion in terms of, is this growth here to stay? Is it really going backwards? Are we no longer? Do we need to jump away from the horse? Because I think there's a lot of discussion internally. Are you done with e-commerce? Is digital now no longer the thing? And I think the reality, as I see it, is in essence a correction of the exponential surge that has been from the pandemic towards a much more linear growth. So I think I've seen and I've read quite a bit around where, in general, digital is going to go in terms of digital business. And I think it's here to stay. It's still going to be the fastest growing channel. I've seen some crazy projection that even if they might be a stretch, some of the foundation on which these projections are based on are very correct. And when you look at consumer behaviors and attitudes, I think these have tremendously shifted, right? So consumers are always connected. They're using a multitude of channels to shop and to engage. And this is here to stay. And when you have conversation with retailers, this is where it becomes a little bit interesting, because a lot of them are talking about it, right? But I think only a few are truly doing omnichannel, right? I think it's quite tangible from that perspective, because one of the reasons why only a few are really doing it is because most of them are really starting to look at the omnichannel with a little bit of a foot on the brake from that perspective. And it has to do with, I guess, a little bit of the transparency around the tremendous benefits that omnichannel has in terms of how much value is there in really doing omnichannel. And I think what's coming to the fore now is that those that have really invested into it from a technology perspective, from a go-to-market strategy perspective, meaning thinking online first and foremost as the portal towards an omnichannel experience, and those that have taken really advantage of their physical presence are the ones that are striving, the ones that are doing really well. Those are the ones that are attracting most of the spend from us manufacturer into the retail ecosystem, because they're really unlocking this omnichannel experience, right? And I've seen some of the stats around how big retail media is becoming, and it's really focused on a few of these big omni-channel players. And the names are the usual suspect. It's your Tesco's, it's your JS, it's your Carrefour in France, and it's the Albert Heijn or Aldo Delhaize in the Netherlands. Those are the ones that I see doing truly omni-channel right. But if you look at it from a total European perspective, there are a lot of those that are still lagging behind from that perspective. So it's a bit of a mixed bag. Some shiny ones out there, some of the ones that are lagging behind.
Yeah, and I think that, for example, the example of Germany, Europe's largest economy, and the main grocers do not have online, basically.
Correct. No, and it's exactly that. I think, it's a recent discussion I've seen about Tesco and ITV partnering together, right? Offering a connection with first-party data that Tesco has into outside of the walled gardens of the retailer. That's a prime example of how omnichannel is accelerated with few selected retailers in few selected markets. And I think for us is really being able to pinpoint which ones are the right retailers and customers, if you want, that we want to be partnering in, to prove that there is a value also for us as Arla in terms of how we approach omnichannel.
Well, and I assume too, and you started to allude to it in terms of like the Arla's approach to this is that it becomes part of the conversation in regards to, for example, what are the capabilities internally at Arla in a particular market, right? So, for example, if you're talking to, if you're assessing the Netherlands, the strength as an omni-channel retailer of an Albert Heijn is going to play a factor in that. Similarly in GB, similarly in France with Carrefour. So I imagine that, in terms of how you guys are incorporating, like you said, that almost like the state of the capabilities of a particular market, the development the leading retailer, let's say, from an omni-channel perspective, is a factor.
You're absolutely right, there. I think it's massive. That I think for us, it really starts from the acknowledgement that we have the consumer, the customer at the center of what we do, right? And I think with that clear thing, we know that omnichannel is a priority for them, and hence it's a priority for us, right? And I think we've come a real long way as an Arla perspective. If I go from pre-pandemic, it was basically e-commerce as a bolt-on business, a standalone, a siloed business. And now it's really shifted dramatically. And the way we look at it is we see online as an extension of the brand experience, right? We really have made a shift from that perspective across all markets, across most brands. And this is the direction that we're going into. And at a total level, I would say the ambition is to offer a seamless, integrated brand experience wherever and whenever our shoppers and our consumers are looking for our products and our brands. And at the same time, the exciting part is we now have been able to prove, be it at the very beginning of our omnichannel journey, that there is a high digital distribution for some of our brands and some of the products, right? You know, on average, they say about 40 to 50% of sales in FMCG are digital influence. We were able, through partnering with some of these retailers in some of the markets, to prove that it's the case for some of our brands. And that completely changed the conversation in terms of internally how we need to drive the agenda when it comes to digital influence in general. But also means that the job that we need to do from an Arla perspective needs to be about having a right, digital house in order from the foundation up, building brands digital first. We really started doing this, and it starts from the planning process in February all the way down into November when we go to the JBP discussion with the customers, is thinking about what are those digital touch points that we take all the way down into the JBP ecosystem and the retailers. We need to be found easily. That's all where it starts. Search is a key component, and then partnering with these retailers from being able to drive revenue holistically. Mm-hmm. And so from a capability perspective, for me, it's about content first. We said it at the beginning of the call. It might not be sexy, but that's where it starts from, right? It's getting those basic foundations right. It's the optimization of the content. It's curated content to help us drive organic search, if you want. Then there is the paid component, and what I call e-shopper marketing. In essence, in simple layman terms, is making sure we drive incremental ROI in every touch point that we spend some investment into it. And then the part that for me is often overlooked is what I call e-category. Those like probably me and F being in this game for a while will remember those days. Is also on the category, and in reality, it's the same from an e-commerce perspective, is how to translate those category drivers into online. And it needs to be where often enough there needs to be a focus, because we need to grow the pie rather than, and then within that, the fair share of the pie itself.
And especially in JBP, which is I think for those of us who've been in FMCG for quite a while, is a common vernacular, joint business plans. But if you're not coming at that from a category perspective, you're not gonna. It's not gonna work. No retailer, no customer is gonna look at you and go and say, "Oh, this is growing your brand, but it's not having the right effect on my category." That's a non-starter right then and there.
It's exactly that.
But digital is no different.
No, it's exactly that, and that's why it's often overlooked. At least where some of the company I've been into, it's been a little bit overlooked, and it's a key way of unlocking those partnerships, as you correctly said, with those retailers. And then for me, the last two is really the data and the insights. I mean, that data lake, or those data points that the business might have into a data lake, I think it's where the rules of the game is at, and really being able to drive insight out of it, I think, is a fundamental piece. And then finally, technology. Your digital asset management systems, your PIM system, and all of those that underpin the deliverable of the unified customer consumer experience is where I think we are really driving the agenda when it comes to Arla to really deliver an omnichannel experience.
Mm-hmm. What about direct to consumer? The elephant a bit in the room sometimes in consumer goods, especially in the lower priced ones. I know that you come from Nestle Waters, Mondelez, which is one of the companies, I think, in fast-moving consumer goods, that's at least in food, that's more crack direct to consumer. And now at Arla, what's been your experience with it?
Look, I think there's been a lot of talk of D2C, right? I think in the last 5 years, probably more so, even in the last 7 or 8 years. I might be the one that goes a little bit against the grind here, because I think, and I might be the one of the few ones that says that it's not fit for all brands and it's not fit for all categories, right? And I know a lot of folks out there will say, oh, I don't agree with that. It needs to be done, because it's also a way of driving conversations with consumers. And I'm not saying we don't need to have conversation with consumers. We absolutely need to do. But there are ways that we can do so differently. What I'm saying is, do we need to have the ability to buy direct from every single one of our brands? Probably not. And I think that's why the risk with D2C is that it becomes that shiny object that takes away effort in terms of people, investment of time, and fundamentally even investment and resources from the business perspective, away for where probably you have biggest opportunity to grow your core business. That's why I tread on this very, very carefully. And as you said, Danny, I've done quite a bit with D2C over the years in Mondelez. And I said at the beginning, I started my career in D2C with a coffee business. What I've learned is that the differentiating value proposition is key, right? And I think at every core of every successful D2C, there's a value exchange. And whether you think of it as solutions, and I'm thinking Cadbury Gift Direct being a prime example of that solution towards your gifting, or Oreo ID as a prime example of something that's been successfully done by Mondelez in the US as well, or My M&Ms, or whether you're offering convenience. So think about Dollar Shave Club as a prime example of there, or a focus on price with subscription models, or offering expertise. And you guys are familiar with any of these vitamin-driven D2C that tailor the right vitamins towards the right solution for you. These are prime examples of value exchange. And this is where it can be successful from a D2C perspective. And I've also learned that there are products that lend themselves better than others when it comes to D2C. And those are the ones that have personalized experience. There's a lot of personalization done from a gifting perspective. Yeah. But there are also some stuff around unique formulation that I mentioned from a vitamin example that I just said. The products that offer a complex shopping experience that cannot be achieved in store. Skincare being a prime example of something that you can incrementally drive through a D2C offering. And then those that have a true exclusive offering. And underpinning this, there's the brand, right? You need to have a strong brand, because I think from that perspective, that's the trick of what every successful D2C does. So I say, word of warning, word of cautious when it comes to D2C. Don't just jump all in with it. Approach it carefully. Be clear what that role is. What is it that you're trying to do with your D2C? And don't just assume that I can sell milk on D2C successfully, because I can tell you it's not going to be the case.
Absolutely. And I think some of those same questions are, you probably should ask that of any channel that you're choosing to go into, right? So D2C is just one, or let's call it the latest channel that we should ask those questions for. So I have one question. I'm going to ask you to look in your crystal ball and help us or share with us and our audience. How do you see e-commerce evolving here in Europe over the next few years? Like, how do you actually, given some of the conditions, like you said, that we're going through now, in essence, where we've got multiple crises kind of bleeding into one another, where do you see things going over the next 2 to 3 years? Or let's say 3 to 5 years, actually.
Yeah. And look, it goes a little bit back to what I was saying in terms of some of those crazy projections that you've seen and you will have seen yourselves about. I think, I'm a firm believer that e-commerce is in growth, will be in growth for the next 5 years. I said to you, is a correction to the exponential growth towards a bit of a more linear growth, if you want, from that perspective. What will then shape how steep that linear growth is? I think it's a couple of factors. One is the evolving consumer expectations. I think what we've seen through the pandemic is truly a democratization of online. And funny enough, if you look at the latest data, these segments that are growing most are your over 60s and your under 25s. So there has been that democratization, and the growth is across, right? And at the same time is also a little bit of a move towards those expectations of consumers that underpin this. It's around what I would say, I'll give you an acronym. We call it BAGA, so buy anywhere, get anywhere. That's, I think, is the direction that e-commerce is going into, right? It's underpinned by the shift of those consumer expectations that e-commerce can cater for different missions and behaviors. And I think that buy anywhere, get anywhere will be an interesting aspect that will help us understand how steep that linear growth will be over the next few years. I think the second factor is the increased competition and investment into the space. You've seen the influx of venture capital money over the last 2 years into quick commerce, a lot more consolidation, companies understanding and carving out their role, retailers carving out their role into what am I going to stand for in terms of that shopping mission, where I'm willing to drive and prioritize my investment from my infrastructure, and also where I want to be known as supporting that shopping mission. And I think online will then reflect quite a few of those shopping missions: convenience, no frills, main shop with some of those big omnichannel retailers. And then the third one, which I think is probably the one factor together with consumer expectation that will really shape the agenda here, is technology. And I mean it because I think technology has the potential of disrupting a lot of parts of the value chain, from a user experience perspective, from a order preparation, from a last mile delivery perspective. And I think if technology comes to the rescue and makes business models that are currently unprofitable profitable or more sustainable, if you want, you know, think about personalization, how it could drive increased basket size, think about automation, how it has the power to transform the cost model of delivery. This could mean that it could be potentially cheaper for some of these retailers to offer cheaper prices to the consumer, hence drive that virtuous circle of growth, attracting more consumers into online, and even maybe discounters. So I think there's a real big opportunity to have a steeper linear growth than we expect if those three aspects work collaboratively together to shape the future of online.
Mm-hmm. Which the three factors again were technology,
consumer expectations, technology, yeah, and this whole rise of competition and investment into the world of e-commerce from the retailer perspective.
Got it. Okay. So, Alberto, when you look back into your career, we have a question we ask all guests, which is, what advice would you give your younger self at the beginning of your career? I can come up with one advice that you gave yourself, which is not go into fashion.
That's the first one. Fashion has probably changed, right? It's probably changed in the old. I'm talking a long time ago. Yeah, I'm old. It gives away how.
Don't look back. Don't look back.
Don't want to look back. I think, for me, the key thing that has really, if I look back at my career, and with one advice that I would give is really to focus on experiences, right? And if I look at myself and what has really been defining my career is being exposed to a multitude of experiences on two levels, right? In terms of the depth. So I've been exposed to category, I've been exposed to sales, I've been exposed to marketing, I've been exposed to operations, because when I did D2C, I also was looking after the back end operation. That was a massive learning curve in terms of my experience baggage, right? And then also from a breadth perspective, meaning different brands, different categories. So the real focus on experience has led me to be in a privileged position, if I look at it, as I look myself now, when it comes to navigating through the matrix organization that I'm working on, at the same time, really being able to have a baggage of knowledge in a world where a lot of these functions are going to be converging, right? And digital is a key enabler of that convergence of a lot of these a lot of these functional expertise. And I think if you focus on experiences and really drive those, and some of those will be lateral. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to grow if experiences north, because I think that lateral movement will pay dividends further down the line. So focus on experiences will be my advice to my younger self.
This was Alberto Kechler, Head of eCommerce Europe at Arla Foods. Efrain, what are your key takeaways of the conversation?
Well, I always enjoy talking to people who are in these regional, global type roles, just to, in essence, pick their brains, if you will, with regards to what they see as what have been their keys to success. So for me, it was really interesting to start hearing Alberto talk about how he's in essence been able to benchmark the different countries in his region around a digital maturity index, and how he's based that on 13 distinct competencies. So it's actually quite robust, and I think it's something for a lot of us to aspire to. So I found that to be really, really impressive.
Yeah, no, I thought that was interesting. Yeah, to come up with such a structured way of approaching things, which, you know, probably in this complex environment, sometimes you need to like auto structure yourself, not to make a bit of sense of it all, I guess.
Well, I think so, and I think it's also interesting that, you know, he's been able to use that one to not just benchmark internally, but also benchmark Arla Foods against peers, or as compared to peers as well, and use that to ultimately drive what the role he and his team need to play would be in terms of, are we talking about a fix, build, or impact type of situation with working with the local market team. So really, really powerful in terms of, you know, on the surface, it sounds quite simple from a framework standpoint, but I think the simplicity works really, really well in these kinds of situations. But I think it's going to help him be very laser pointed, or has helped him be very laser pointed in regards to what he's gone and done in terms of building capability.
Yeah, I think it was also very interesting how we were around the direct-to-consumer question, which is the classical elephant in the room in fast-moving consumer goods. It was pretty straightforward, saying that it's a model that can work sometimes, but it doesn't really work for lots of categories. It's never going to work. So I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, well, I think so. I mean, I think that, you know, he also, in essence, gave us his formula for winning in D2C in terms of having a differentiated value proposition, really thinking about what is the level of personalization that you can deliver, both in terms of products, but I think more holistically from an experiential standpoint. And to that point, being able to think about what are some of the things that you can't do in an in-store environment that you can do online, which ultimately also then is supported by, is there any sort of unique product assortment that you can deliver online as well? So I think, you know, when you think about it in those terms, he's kind of in essence given us a little bit of insight into how he's looking at D2C at Arla Foods.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, thanks, Efrain, for your conclusions. It's always good to recap after a long conversation. Thanks to our listeners as well for tuning in. Remember, you can follow us on LinkedIn, where we're creating more and more content, like some video series hosted by Raphael Schwartz. You can also follow the CPG guys, which are our counterparts at the other side of the Atlantic. Hope you enjoyed the episode today, and we'll see you in the next episode of the FMCG guys.